to exercise 3, quick photo edits. This exercise is going to be a little bit different than the exercises we've done previously, where this one has 5 parts to it. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you're naming your images and files correctly according to the instructions I've posted on Canvas. And like I mentioned, these are all quick photo edits. This should be a pretty quick and painless exercise, but it does have, quite a few parts to it. But we're once again using some pretty automated and AI tools with Photoshop. So this, will be pretty quick. Hopefully you will find these tools beneficial in your careers as, maybe photographers or designers, whatever it is you may be doing. I do really hope that you find these tools useful. So we're going to start with this red eye image here that you can see on my screen. I'm going to go ahead and just click and drag this into Photoshop to open it. You can also just go to File, Open from your Photoshop screen. You can also right click or control click if you're on a Mac to open with Photoshop. Just a couple of options there. So once again, we are directly opening this file in Photoshop. We're not creating a new canvas or a new artboard. So keep that in mind. We're going to be doing the same thing with the other images in this exercise. All right, and then a good thing to probably start with is just doing a save as, because right now this is just a JPEG opened in Photoshop, but we want to make sure that we save this as a .psd file. So just for good practice, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I just did the shortcut on my keyboard, but you can also go to File and Save As. And hopefully you are creating folders and organizing your files on your computer in some way. This will make your life so much easier. So save this to a place where you will remember what it is. Once again, we're using the same naming conventions that we've been doing in the other exercises and projects. So this is exercise 3. And then this one is part 1. So you're just going to save it as _1. And then make sure that you select Photoshop in the format down here at the bottom. All right. So red eye is something, that can happen with flash photography, especially photography taken in darker environments. There can be this reflection on people's eyes from the flash of a camera. I feel like it's not super common because our cameras, even on our phones now, are so advanced. But this still is a helpful tool, especially if you've got some older photos that you want to scan and correct, or maybe this is still happening to you on a lot of, images that you're taking. So this is going to be the quickest part. We're just going to hit J on the keyboard. And you can see when I do that, it takes me to, right now it's taking me to the patch tool. But if you're seeing patch tool in your toolbar or remove or something like that, go ahead and just click and hold that icon and make sure that you're selecting this red eye tool. And that's why it's the easiest to kind of just hit that shortcut J on the keyboard. That way you know you're in this correct tool, and then you can just click and hold to make sure that red eye is selected, because it will probably not default to that on your computer. It is the last option here in this little menu. And red eye is pretty quick and easy with this tool. You're kind of just going to click and drag around the area of red. You can see I'm going to Command Z just to go back. This is a destructive tool, so you might have to do a Command Z if it's not getting you the effect that you want. And you can see that if I click and drag an area that's, pretty tight around the red eye, it's actually not really capturing all of the red for me. So I'm just going to hit Command Z, or on PC, I believe it's Control Z to undo. So you might have to kind of try this a couple times and just feel free to edit undo or Command Z a couple of times if you're not getting what you want. But you can see that you do kind of have to click around almost the whole kind of iris, if I'm saying that correctly, almost the entire eye to capture all of that red. But I feel like that looks pretty natural, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other eye. I'm selecting a pretty large area here. So kind of get a feel for that, get a feel for how large of an area you need to select, but you'll probably have to do what I just did here. And that is it for this first part of the exercise. After this, you will just do a quick Command S or File Save to make sure that you're saving your PSD file here. And then you will be exporting this to a web-sized JPEG. And I'm going to go over that really quickly now, but you should be pretty familiar with this. To export this for web to upload to Canvas, you will go to File and then Export. Whoops. And then this Save for Web Legacy option is what I like to use. There are other ways that you can export here, but I find that the best way to export for web that's going to be the smallest, most compressed file size that's most appropriate for web is this option here. And you'll click that. JPEG High preset is fine. Just make sure that you have some sort of JPEG selected here under preset. High and quality is basically just the quality of the image. It's probably going to default to around 60 to 100 here. I would leave it as that. We're not trying to reduce this a ton. And then this image probably should be 1920, but the typical thing that we do to upload these images in order to have them display nicely in those Canvas discussion boards is we resize them to 1920 pixels on their longest edge. That's always going to be specified in Canvas. So if you need to resize it, it will be here. If it's under 1920 on its longest edge, in this case, this one is 1919 or 1919 pixels, you can just leave that. But if you were wondering how to resize, that's how you would do that. And if I was resizing this even smaller, just as an example, you don't need to do this. You can see that it's constraining the proportions of the height as well, as long as you don't touch this. Just leave that there. And it will keep that image constrained so that you're not getting any weird stretching or anything like that. But I'm just going to keep this at that 1919, hit save. And this is where you would add the web text that I've specified on Canvas. So always double check Canvas for all of the correct turn-in instructions. I'm not necessarily going to go over all of the details here. And then you would just save. I'm just going to quickly save this to my desktop. So that's how you would export your smaller web-sized JPEG in order to upload to Canvas. And then you can see we still have the PSD file here. I just quickly saved that. I can close it, but I'll just leave it open for now. So that is the red eye, or the first part of this exercise, completed. Now we're going to move on to part 2, which is this one here, dark face. You can see we're calling it that because it is a very dark image that needs a little bit of correction. So you can see we would love to kind of brighten her up a little bit, you know, just sort of showcase this woman as a better portrait. This image has a really low exposure to it. So we definitely want to make some updates here. So the first thing we're going to do is add an adjustment layer. We're going to add this curves adjustment layer. So you should be pretty familiar with adjustment layers, as it was a major requirement for the last module. And you can play around with some of the presets in here. We definitely don't want to make it darker. We could see what lighter looks like. That does kind of help a little bit. Maybe we'll start there. We'll start with that lighter preset. So you could play with that. And what curves is doing is basically adjusting the shadows, the midtones, and highlights in the image. So the shadows are the darkest parts of the image that are almost black here. The highlights are probably like highlights in the eyes here, highlights in some of the lights, kind of the lighter areas of the image. And then midtones are things that, color that sort of falls between that. So you can kind of click and drag your curve here to lighten things up. You can also click and add more points that you can adjust individually. So by adding this one here, I can kind of bring some of the midtones down a little bit. So I'm just going to keep playing with this. Till I've maybe got something kind of like that. So just play with this. Yours doesn't need to be exactly what I have here, but just kind of start to get a feel for how curves can help you. And the nice thing, once again, about using adjustment layers is that we can always go back and edit this later, especially as we keep making edits to this photo. All right. The next thing we're going to do is play around with a smart filter on this image. And we're going to play around with something called Liquify, which is a little bit of a controversial tool, which you will see why in just a moment here. So we're going to select the background layer here, the image layer in this file. Oh, and actually, I'm just going to quickly do a file save, just as a reminder for all of you to make sure that you're doing your save as to make sure you have these PSD files saved. And this is part 2. Sorry, gotta add exercise 3. So now I have my PSD file saved. You have a couple options with this filter that we're going to add. You can just go to the top and go to filter liquify, but if you want to keep this more editable, non-destructive, you can also change this into a smart filter. Or you can, I'm sorry, you can convert this layer for smart filters. So to do that, you can just select that background layer like I already did, go to filter and convert for smart filters. So the only difference by adding this step is that it will be non-destructive and editable, which I quite like. But this will also make your file quite a bit larger. So just sort of keep that in mind. And what this is doing is basically converting this layer to what's called a smart object. That is something that's going to be coming up in other tutorials, other projects for this class. So I'm not going to go over that completely right now, but just keep in mind that you will see that again. And so we did that convert for smart filters. You can see that now that that option is disabled because we've already done that. And then I'm going to go down to this liquify option here. And you can see this opens up a completely different menu in Photoshop, gives us very different options here. And you can play around with a lot of kind of crazy things in here. You can even make this person smile. So you can see there's little things you can toggle open and closed here. So under mouth, you can actually toggle this and make her smile. So you can see what I'm saying, where this is a little bit controversial. We don't always want to adjust images, especially images of people, so completely that they obviously look like a completely different person, or the purpose of the image has changed entirely. So just keep in mind that you want to be, sort of careful with these tools depending on the use of your final imagery. But I think it's still kind of a fun tool to play with. I think it can be really beneficial, and also just, like I said, it's just fun. It's sort of one of those things that you can't believe can actually happen in Photoshop. At least I can't, or I couldn't when I first discovered this. So we are going to kind of add a little bit of a smile here, maybe somewhere around there. I don't want it to look too unnatural. Let's see. Let's also play around with the eyes a little bit so you can increase or decrease the distance. I'm going to kind of do this drastically so you can see. You can increase or decrease the distance between the eyes. I'm going to increase it just a little bit. And then maybe I'll try to make the eyes a little bit bigger too. We can adjust the eye width. I'm just going to do this a little bit to about, we'll leave it at 22, and we'll make sure that the other eye matches at 22. So you can do those individually. You can also play around with the height, but I think I'm going to leave the height where it is. You can even just type in 0 to take that back to where it was. And actually the width I think is a little bit too crazy. I'm going to take that down to 15, but this is up to you. You definitely don't need to match exactly what I'm doing here. You can also play around with elements of the face. So we could look at face shape. Maybe we'll increase the height of the chin a little bit. Yeah, I'm just kind of playing with this to see how crazy we could get. So I'm going to take this down quite a bit. We'll take that down to negative 67. But this is up to you. If you want to give her a shorter chin, try that out. Face width, maybe we'll increase. Let's see how crazy we could get with that. Maybe we'll take that to about 75, 80, 73, I guess is where I'm landing. Nose height. So let's take a look at nose. You can also adjust the height and the width of the nose. You can see how crazy this can get. Maybe we'll take this to about 40. So feel free to play around with all of these, or you could just stick to the ones that I just went over. Again, a very fun tool, but just keep in mind the ethics of this tool, the ethics of, drastically changing someone's face. And you can always go to the bottom here and you can uncheck this preview to kind of see the before and after. I'm not exactly sure about my ethics here, to be honest. I feel like it is a pretty drastic change when I look at the before and after. But for the purpose of this learning exercise, I think I'm okay. So I'm going to click OK now that I've completed those liquify changes. And you can see this is the benefit to using smart filters is then you can go back, you can double click on liquify here that's added at the bottom, and you can keep adjusting all of these things that I've just done. So if I want to change that nose height a little bit, I can do that here and I can hit OK and it'll close that. So it'll save all of those options for me here. So that's up to you. If you don't convert to smart filters first, you will not have that option. But if you do, you will see it sort of added as an effect below the layer here that you can turn on and off. So you can see once I'm turning this back on, it is very slow. It will slow down your computer a little bit. There we go. So keep that in mind. It is going to make your file quite a bit larger. And that's all we're going to do for this image. So all we did was play around with that curves adjustment layer to kind of brighten this up a little bit. And then we added that liquify filter to the face to play around with that and see if we could make some changes there. All right, so that is part 2. Now I'm going to go into part 3, which is this image called Geometry Sky. So once again, we're just going to open this image directly into Photoshop. You can always do file open if you're, uncomfortable with dragging things around like I just did. All right, so we have this image of this building. It's a beautiful sunny day, but I'm going to show you how we could make some improvements to an image where there's sort of this idea of geometry involved. There's a lot of straight lines. There's a street, a sidewalk here that you can see is looking a little bit warped in the image. There's also a lot of lines going vertically with this building here. And a lot of this stuff can happen due to what's called lens distortion. It can especially happen if you're using something like a wide angle lens on a DSLR camera. You can get a lot of these distortions, but they're really easily correctable in Photoshop. Also other tools, like if you're using Capture One or something like that. Sometimes I'm sure you could even change these things in your camera. So with the background layer selected, once again, I'm going to do this optional option. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to convert it to smart filters just so that now it's a smart object and any filter I apply to it will be fully adjustable. And then I'm going to go to filter, at least I think it's in filter. Yeah, camera raw filter. So I converted for smart filters. Now I'm going to filter camera raw filter. And you can see once again, oh, I've got a little update here. I'm going to close that, but feel free to check out that tutorial if you'd like to. This gives us another completely different modal to Photoshop, just like the Liquify filter did. And we're going to be playing around with this tool primarily called geometry. We're going to just kind of click that little caret icon to open this part of the camera raw filter. There are several other options in here. We're going to be playing around with a few of these other options later on in the class. So keep keep that in mind, or if you want to play around with some of those now, that's fine too. But for this particular exercise, we're going to focus on geometry here. And we're going to see what these presets will do for us. So you can see it says upright. These little icons here are basically presets for geometry. So we're going to try this auto preset. You can see once I did that, it just sort of auto corrected the geometry for me, which is very quick and easy. I can kind of disable it to do a little quick before and after. But you can see if geometry is something that's really important to you in your images, if you're taking a lot of images of street scenes like this, where you really want to straighten out the street or the sidewalk to the bottom of the crop here, this can be a really quick and functional tool for you. So we're going to keep that auto adjustment on. You can also play around with this manually, but I think auto is giving us what we want. The other thing that we're going to play with here, I'm actually going to close geometry now. We're going to open up this optics menu. And we're going to play around with distortion. You can see if I really go crazy with this, it actually warps the entire image. But realistically, whenever you're using something like this, you probably just want to adjust it just a little bit. So I'm actually just going to distort it to +2. So it just sort of removes that lens distortion a little bit more. It kind of perfects this image to more of what I want it. You could even add a little vignette to this if you want to. That's basically adding that kind of shading around the corners of the image. I'll probably just leave that as is, but if you wanted to play around with that, go for it. And that's where we're going to leave it in Camera Raw right here for now. Like I mentioned, we're going to dive into this a little bit more later on, and we're going to be working with some raw image types as well. But for now, we're going to just hit OK. So we adjusted geometry and optics here. And that could be a little bit slow. So if you did that convert to smart filters with the first image and you don't want to do it here because it slowed things down, that's totally fine. But I just like it because it gives you that flexibility. You can go back and edit these things further. But you can see if I turn that off, what a huge difference editing the geometry of this made. And the last thing we're going to play with is another automated tool that's called sky replacement. So you can see we've got pretty nice sky in this image, but Photoshop has a pretty fun tool to just quickly, it does exactly what it says. It replaces the sky of the image, which is a crazy thing to me. That's not something that I could do when I first learned Photoshop. So not to sound like a broken old record, but you guys are so lucky. And to edit the sky or do a quick sky replacement, you're going to go up to the menu bar, just hit edit, and then sky replacements kind of towards the middle, towards the bottom a little bit here. Once again, this is another automated tool where Photoshop is going to be doing all of the work for you. Typically, you would add the sky as a separate image and you'd kind of have to create a mask, do all that kind of stuff that you're already familiar with. But this is going to do all of that for you, which I think is amazing. And it's kind of a fun tool to play around with in your photography. So you can see it says sky here. If you open this, there's several presets. You can actually add your own images too. But for this exercise, you'll probably just stick to the presets. You can play around with previewing different options here. I think I'm going to stick with this one here, but feel free to select whichever sky you want. You can see there's several available. They even have like a lot of sunset images. Kind of fun to play around with, see the different options there. And then you can also adjust some of these options here. So shift edge, you can see if I push this up, it's actually shifting the edge of sort of the selection area of the mask. So the more that I push that up, it's actually kind of bleeding into the image of the building, which I don't want. I'm actually going to take it down just a little bit, maybe to -7 there. You can also play around with fade edge. I'll probably leave that one as is. And you can also just sort of quickly make some adjustments to the sky itself. So you could kind of cool it down temperature wise or warm it up. You can see that it becomes a lot warmer of an image if I take this all the way up to the yellow zone. I'm going to keep it a little bit cooler. Just kind of make your best judgment and decide what looks best in terms of, you know, the existing image here. You just kind of want to match the overall color, saturation, lighting. These are always things that we could keep playing around with later. Just kind of use your best judgment, your best design eye to make these decisions now. There are these other foreground adjustments that we're not going to mess with for now, but if you wanted to play around with those, feel free. Oh, and you can also adjust the scale of the clouds, which can be kind of helpful. Maybe I'll take the scale up just a little bit to that. And then you can hit OK when you've completed this. And you can see when I do that, it's added this sky replacement group to my layers panel. I can turn that on and off to see the before and after. And like I said, it's doing all of that manual labor for you. So it added the sky with a mask so that you're still able to see the building image. And then it added this temperature or color balance adjustment layer to the sky. And you can see it's got that little arrow, so it means it's option clicked or it's applied to the sky layer below it. So you could kind of keep playing with the temperature of this if you want to. So if I wanted to make it even more blue and cool toned, I could do that here. So kind of a cool feature. Hopefully you'll find that useful and kind of fun in some of your other projects as well. And that's all we're going to be doing for the third part of this exercise, where we edited the geometry of the image and did a little sky replacement. So I'm going to move on to the fourth part, which is this image called Blur Tools. I'm going to click and drag this into Photoshop as well. And here we have an image of a woman, or she's sort of the central figure here. Obviously, a lot of other people. This is sort of a street scene. And we're going to play around with adding a blur to this. And a blur is something that you would typically see with depth of field in photography. So when you have something that, you know, has sort of a foreground and a little bit of a blurred or out of focus background, that's something you would typically get from, you know, high quality camera lenses, something that can even happen on an iPhone nowadays because these cameras have gotten so incredible. But if you have kind of a lower quality image or an image that doesn't have that depth of field or that blurred background to the extent that you want it, you can always add it and kind of fake it in Photoshop. All right, so what we're going to do here, once again, go to filter. I'm actually not going to convert it for smart filters this time. I'm just going to keep this file smaller, but that's always an option that you have. And then we're going to go to, let's see, actually not blur. We're going to go to filter and then filter gallery. Is this what I want? I might have made a mistake. Sorry, guys. There's so many blurs here that I forget where it's located. So we're actually not filter gallery. We're going to go to blur gallery. So once again, in the menu bar, filter, and then blur gallery. You can select any of these, but we're going to start with field blur. But these will all open the same menu. So you can see now I've got, once again, another completely different modal. And you can see you've got these other types of blurs that you can add. We're going to play around with field blur first with this kind of circle thing in the middle here. This is what you're using to identify the focal point of your image. Actually, we might want to do a different type of blur here. Yeah, so you could play around with field blur, but I don't think that's giving me the effect that I want here. So I'm going to turn this one off. Let's see if iris blur helps us. Iris blur might be more beneficial here because we have a wider area that we can sort of adjust the focal point here. So you have to kind of click this little circle in the middle to move this iris or this circle around to your focal point, and then you can click and drag the edges to increase the size of that focal point. And when I say focal point, I just mean the sort of the object that's in focus here, everything outside of it being more blurred. And then you can increase or decrease the blur in this little toggle here on the right. You can also do it by clicking this little circle here. You can see I'm increasing it, now I'm decreasing it. And then I'm just adjusting the size and shape of this iris here, this circular shape around my focal point. So that's iris blur. I'm actually not even sure if iris blur is going to be what I want. I'm going to keep it for now. You can also, we'll just uncheck iris blur for now. We're going to play around with tilt shift. So that's now checked on. And tilt shift kind of does a similar thing, except it gives you these straight lines that you can adjust. This can be really beneficial for landscapes, you know, or sort of wider, more horizontal images like this. I actually think iris blur is working better for this particular image, but you could kind of play around with this one as well. You can see you could get some kind of crazy diagonal blurs here. You can play around with the scale of that blur once again. I'm going to turn this one off. Look at iris blur again. I think I like what iris blur is looking like. You could also play around with path blur. This one's a little bit more complicated. I'm not really going to go over this one, but if you want to dive into that, feel free. Check that one off. Spin blur can be, you can see it's literally creating a spin, a blurred spin on my image. This one can be kind of fun for like car photography if you want to show that motion in a wheel, for example, but definitely not appropriate for this image. So we're going to leave iris blur, and we're going to edit that once again just by clicking that iris blur title to open the menu here. And you're going to want something that looks sort of like this, that has this iris around the figure here. You can kind of play around with the amount of blur that you want to show. I'm going to keep it somewhat natural. You can see this menu is a little bit different for some reason. If you want to apply this effect, you hit OK at the top, preview, so you can see the before and after is also located at the top here. So I'm going to hit OK. And now this is what I'm saying when you don't convert for smart filters, this is where it becomes destructive, where it's actually applying that to your layer here. But you always have options. You can always duplicate that layer initially to kind of have a second layer that's blurred, for example, or you can do that convert for smart filters. All right. So that's all we're going to do with this blur part of the exercise. So this is part, what are we on now? Part 4. So you will save this as a PSD and export this one as well, and then move on to part 5, which is this image here that's called generative fill. Once again, we're going to click and drag this into Photoshop. You can see we have this kind of city scene that, you know, I cannot really speak other languages. I cannot read the writing here. I'm assuming this is maybe Japan, definitely an Asian country, just judging on the characters that I'm seeing here. But just kind of thought this was a cool image to play with. I did grab this one from Unsplash, and we're going to be playing around with some AI Photoshop effects on this one. So you're probably pretty familiar with this little contextual, I think it's called contextual taskbar or something in Photoshop that appears when basically whenever you open anything and when you have something selected in Photoshop. If you ever want to hide this, which I normally do because I just find that it gets a little distracting for me, you can always go to Window. All the way down at the bottom here, you can uncheck contextual taskbar and you can hide it. So that is an option. Keep that in mind if that's ever bothering you, you know, during your workflow here. But in this case, because we're going to be using generative fill, we actually need to have this taskbar showing. So we're going to keep it there for now, but just wanted to share that as an option. Okay, so we're going to start with something called generative expand, and we're also going to go over the crop tool, which you've probably heard of or played around with, but we didn't really go over it specifically, so I'm going to do that now. So the crop tool is the shortcut on the keyboard is just C, very easy to remember. You can see it's sort of towards the top. You can hover over it and see exactly what it does. And once you're in this crop tool mode, you're basically only able to kind of click and drag the edges of your artboard or your canvas here. And what we're doing here is kind of just playing around with the crop of the image. So of course you can crop things smaller. That's always an option with any image. But the crazy thing to me is that now Photoshop has this tool called generative expand, which is going to look something like this when you have the crop tool selected and you're, you know, basically expanding your crop. And you can see right now when I do that, there isn't, you know, there aren't other pixels of this image that are going to appear here. There isn't other information that's included in this image. So if I want to add more information, I have to create that, or in this case, AI or Photoshop's, Adobe's AI can actually create pixels for me. So it should look something like this when you have added more of a crop. So once again, I just used the crop tool and I just clicked and dragged the bottom right corner here to add some space to the right and the bottom. And it's going to give you this little text box that says, what would you like to generate? Or it might default to show you this. You can click on generative expand. And then where it says, what would you like to generate? We're actually just going to type expand here. And what that's telling Photoshop to do, or telling the AI, is to add pixels that are sort of mimicking what the actual area outside of this image might look like. And we're going to hit generate. This could take a little while depending on your computer's processing power. Also, make sure that you are updated to the latest and greatest Photoshop to use this tool. But I think everybody in here should be. So you can see that did an okay job. just going to kind of click and drag to open this little menu on the right more. You can see it gives you variations to choose from. So it's giving us 3 different options here. I'm just going to keep the first option for now. And then if I go back to my layers panel, you can toggle this on and off to see the before and after. So it did an okay job with the very edge and the bottom here, but then for some reason it's just sort of added this blue and black area. So it's not perfect. And that's why we have to learn both the automated tools and the manual tools, because you could actually do some manual work to make this look even more realistic if you want. But I guess the AI is sort of imagining that we're looking at this, I don't know, through a window or next to another building or a pillar or something like that. So it's just sort of giving us an idea of what that could look like. But this exercise is just about these automated tools, this AI tool. So we're just going to leave that as is. We're not going to be doing further edits. So you'll just do exactly what I just did and then pick whichever variation you think works best. And then we're going to do a couple of other generative fill things to this image. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is try removing something or try to remove something in this image. So you can decide if you want to remove an object or maybe signage, maybe a person. And we're going to start, I'm going to make sure I just have my background layer selected here. I think you could probably have either layer selected, but just to be safe, I'm going to select the background layer. I'm going to grab a selection tool. You can use any selection tool you wish. You can play around with this and see if, you know, maybe the pen tool, maybe more concise selection tools give you a better option here, but I'm just going to do this really quickly. So I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool and try to remove this tree. I feel like this is a pretty complex object for this tool to try and remove. So I want to see what it does. I did actually try this before, but you can always get different results when you try this. So I'm going to see what happens. So I'm just sort of broadly selecting. You might want to take a little bit more time to do this. For the purposes of this exercise, to keep this video short, I'm just going to select it as quickly as I can. So I just did a little polygonal lasso around that tree. Now I'm going to click generative fill in this contextual bar once again. And I'm just going to type remove and hit generate. Once again, it's making another generative AI layer here. And those are indicated by these little star sparkle icons here. And it will name your layers whatever you have prompted the tool with. So you can see that one was expand, this one is remove. It actually did an okay job. I can turn that on and off to see. You can see it's not perfect, especially with the face here. And as I'm sure you guys know, AI with text can always have a lot of mistakes. So I can't read this text, but I'm assuming that that is not correct either, but not too bad. So we're going to leave that on. So we removed the tree as well as expanded and added more pixels to this image. The next thing I want to do is add an object. So I removed an object, now I'm going to add an object. And I'm just going to grab another quick selection tool. This is the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to select this area here, just with a simple rectangle. Hit generative fill, and now I'm actually going to prompt it to add a new object. So I'm going to say car zooming past and hit generate. Once again, this is going to take a moment. Curious to see what kind of options I can get with this one. You'll probably find that adding objects is going to take longer than removing objects because the AI has to do a bit more work searching within that database to see what it can pull. taking a little bit longer than I thought, but I hope it works. Hope nothing crashes here. There we go. Okay, that looks a little funky. So I can see my variations here. I can also just toggle through them here. I think I like this black car. I think I'm going to leave that one. And then if I look at my layers panel, I can kind of click and drag to make that larger. You can see the car zooming past. Feel free to do a little bit of cleanup here with the object that you've added. So you can go into this mask here. You know, I could use like a soft brush, for example. And, you know, if I zoom in and show you what I'm thinking here, you know, you could kind of remove, making sure I have black, remove some of these weird pixels that are appearing, or even kind of go in and be a little more precise and remove some of these extra lines, but say you want to keep kind of these highlights. If I turn this on and off, you can see it's adding some highlight of the headlights in the street here. You know, you can definitely use some quick tools just with the mask that it's provided for you, just to kind of clean up some of the work that the AI has done, because it's never going to be perfect. And once again, that's why we learn all of these tools. So even if we are using these quick automated tools, we still know the manual processes, so we can kind of clean things up and fix them where it's needed. So I would definitely say the car zooming past looks okay if I really zoom out, but if you zoom in on this image, it definitely doesn't look super realistic. It sort of looks like it was quickly scribbled in with some paint. So it's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. Just kind of fun to play around with. So this one is also up to you. So you do, as part of the requirements for this, you do need to add that expand using the crop tool. You need to remove something in the image, and then you need to add something. But whatever you add, whatever you remove is entirely up to you. And then I'm going to have you add one more thing to this kind of blank red billboard here. I'm going to try to do this quickly. Once again, grabbing my polygonal lasso tool. And I'm just going to make a broad selection around this entire sort of, you know, rectangle of this billboard here. Generative fill. And I want you to, you know, play around with whatever you want to add here, but play around with adding some type of billboard or artwork. So, I don't know, I'm going to say, I don't even know if I need to say add. Definitely not spelling graffiti correctly. There we go. Add graffiti style art. And I'm going to see what this will come up with for me. So I'm just trying to fill this area with something that feels somewhat realistic, like it could actually be on the side of a building. Whoa, and you can see, I think because I had the light selected there, that this first option is actually creating artwork using the light, which is kind of interesting. So once again, this is where the selection tools are really, you know, beneficial. They can really change what you're getting with your prompts here. I think I'll keep this second option, and then once again, I could go in and clean up with the mask. I could kind of add my lamp back in there to kind of take this back to where it actually was. So something like that. So play around with adding whatever you want here. If I zoom out, that actually doesn't look too bad. I probably have to clean up in the mask a little bit more. But in the end, you'll have something like this. So the requirements are listed on Canvas, so you can view that list of exactly what you need to do using Adobe's generative fill here. And then once you're done, you will have something that looks like mine. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers here. And 4 of those will be those generative AI layers. So don't flatten these layers, keep them as is so that I can open your PSD files and see exactly what you did. And have fun playing around with this. You know, always keep in mind the ethics of AI, of what we're doing here. This is, you know, for exercise purposes only, but also think about kind of the realism that you want to portray here. So think about the reasoning behind why you're choosing the objects to remove or add. Do you think it enhances the overall image and creates something more beautiful than what we started with? So just kind of think about some of those decisions that you're making here. And I hope you have fun with it. I hope this exercise was helpful, and I will see you when I see you. I'll see you for the next project.